they throw live birds into an engine, could do damage to the airplane, and you could hurt people. Taken to some undisclosed location. Now, did you have a pilot nickname? All right, BDC. In 1952, when flying on a prop plane, the pilots wore headgear and had to listen to a broadcast tone to stay on course. Yeah, that was true back in the day. Yes, Steve, I listened through the headphones. How did that work, and when did the practice stop? I also remember sleepers in the back with curtains. Wow, these are older airplanes. And yeah, back in the day, they used to have just almost like trains. They would have compartments in the back where you could buy a sleeping berth and everything else. Again, to go from New York to Los Angeles was basically 2 stops in between, and it took the better part of 10 to 11 hours for that whole journey, so you get a little rest in. And the pilots many times would have to listen on headsets. VOR frequencies back in the day, the early days, and they still do, but they had a tone associated with them. So you would have to sit and listen to the tone to make sure that you had the right frequency. All of that stuff is done. It's all automated by the computer now. Nowadays, there's satellites and there's GPS and there's internal navigation units, and there's still the old VOR units that are still around, but that was all there was back in the day. And so the pilots would have to dial in a CDI and they'd fly direct out one course, and then they'd have to dial it in halfway to the next course and fly the radial in. They do that all the way across country. It was very labor intensive, and part of that was listening as well. That's and also people in the back of the airplane, passengers, had headphones where they could listen into the pilots doing their job. They got rid of all of that. It's called attorneys. All right. Corey in Nebraska. Why are hard landings becoming so much more common? I had a recent trip with 5 flight legs. First of all, why did you fly a 5-legger? I mean, to go someplace, right? Is that like a Priceline special or something? And I had 4 of those nearly rattled my fillings out. Is it pilot experience, or could ATC be forcing faster landings due to high demand? No, you still come in at the same speed, and it's not because they're pushing more metal to get places. I think you just had a bad day. You probably flew with some Air Force pilots. Just saying. Okay. Nothing personal against my Air Force buddies, but sometimes you know what I mean. All right. Mike Sylvia writes, seat belt light goes off. Everybody stands up and waits their turn to get off. Yeah, that's in an ideal world, right? Except for the rudes, in all air quotes, right? They push their way up, sometimes even blocking a row from getting up on out of their seat. Rude or not. I'd also like to hear your thought on how passengers should handle this. Well, folks, again, you're in a tight space with a lot of people, and it depends on how long you've been there. Not everybody has been to charm school, and you understand how this works. I just try to get along with everybody. I'm not there to make waves, and I'm not there to change the world. And you know what? I think as I get older, I've become more patient, and I'm not in such a big hurry. You all know my 9/11 story. I was originally scheduled to be the co-pilot on the first airplane. It was hijacked on September 11th. Ever since then, I'm not in as big a hurry. If something doesn't work out, somebody wants to cut in front of me, you know what? Knock yourself out. You never know why or what purpose there could be in you getting delayed. All right, so just think about that for a minute. And yeah, is it rude? It seems that way, but you know what? I want to foster more kindness and generosity these days. I just don't have the bandwidth to be upset or to say something about it, especially if the guy's bigger than me. All right, Dana Gavang writes, thanks for serving. I was also Navy. My pilot friends all had call sign or nicknames. Oh no, some rather humorous, like my friend Wrong Way. In your Navy career, here comes, did you have a pilot nickname like Goose or Maverick? Talk to me, Goose. I did get a call sign. All right, I'm going to explain my call sign here in a minute, and I'm going to regret doing this. I know it because it's going to stick with me. It has my whole life. But you don't get to pick your call sign. It gets assigned to you by other people around you, just like a nickname. You don't get to pick it. Others do. So when I was brand new to my first P3 squadron up in Brunswick, Maine, there was an instructor pilot by the name of Tom Gallo. Tom was a really nice guy, very knowledgeable in the airplane, and he had a long pointer that he would pull out. And as you were sitting in the seat, he'd be pointing to various things. At the same time, this is about 1985, 86 time frame, there was a Burger King commercial. And the Burger King commercial that ran for, I don't know, the better part of a year was a school teacher with a long pointer who was chastising a student in her classroom named Herbert. And so she would smack Herbert and say, "Herbert, pay attention." I don't know what it had to do with Burger King, but that's another story for another day. And it was a very famous commercial. So he was smacking me with this stick and trying to get me to pay attention. And he just called me Herbert. And he said, "Herbert, pay attention." And that was it. A nickname, a call sign was born. I got called Herb, H-E-R-B. I got called Herb for the rest of my Navy career. There are people on this planet that don't know me by any other name. Sometimes I'm walking down the concourse in an airline or, at an airport, and I'll hear from a distance, "Herb!" And I know it's somebody from my Navy days, all right, just for sure. They called my kids the Herbettes. They called the fair and lovely Mrs. Captain Steeeve, Mrs. Herb. All right. So there you go. I'm going to regret that. I know it. Let's go to the video questions. We've got 2 of them this week.
Hey, Captain Steeeve, I have a question. How do pilots get out of turbulence?
Okay, that's a quick question. How do pilots get out of turbulence? Sometimes you can. Sometimes you have to mitigate the turbulence. Sometimes we slow down a little bit. Generally speaking, we'll either climb up or we'll descend to get out of turbulence. I can handle light turbulence. When we start to get into moderate turbulence, I'm always on the radio saying, is there a smooth ride somewhere up ahead? Even if we've got to go left or right to avoid a patch of turbulence. Generally speaking, you'll descend. Sometimes you can climb above it, but it depends on the weight of the aircraft and how much fuel you've burned down and so forth. But those are the primary ways: climbing, descending, turning left, turning right. You don't ever really turn around, but you don't ever want to fly through severe turbulence because you could do damage to the airplane and you could hurt people in the back. Excellent, excellent question. All right, next video question.
Hi, Captain Steeeve. My name is Ben, and my question to you is this. It's been over 12 years since the disappearance of MH370 on March 8th, 2014. My question is, what are your thoughts on the disappearance of this crash, and will the aircraft ever be found?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Ben, for the question. I do get that question quite often in the comments. So a lot of you have had that. And the answer is, I think we all hope at some point it'll be found. There's nobody actively looking for it anymore. I think they spent well over $100 million looking for that airplane. It's most likely at the bottom of a very, very deep ocean. And most likely it's intact because I think 1 or 2 of the parts have washed up. But for the most part, it's probably in a very, very deep, maybe 18,000 foot depth of altitude or in the ocean. And it's going to be really difficult to find that airplane. It's a shame what happened. You've heard me before advocate for Boeing and Airbus to put floating emergency locator transmitters on the airplanes so that when the airplane crashes, you could put it in the tail. Most airplanes will crash nose first to some extent, but it would immediately eject and float. And then you would save the $150 million it took to look for this airplane and not find it because you could find it immediately. But that's another cost that the manufacturers and the airlines are going to have to absorb if they want to do that in the future. I think governments should mandate it. But this airplane, it wasn't taken to some undisclosed location. There, you can't hide a 777. It's most likely at the bottom of the ocean, which is very sad. All right. Hank Ball writes this. It's been a hot summer here in Colorado, everywhere. And it makes me curious, are high and hot conditions much of a concern for pilots of commercial aircraft? And then he goes on to say, how do you calculate all that stuff? Yeah, it is much of a concern. In fact, usually in the summertime, I'm looking very carefully at the altitude of the airport I'm going to, and especially the temperature. Now, a lot of those calculations are done for me now already. Dispatch will send me a flight plan with power settings and everything else. I have the discretion, though, as the captain, to take a higher power setting if I want it. On turbine engines, there's a longer spool up time, the higher and the hotter it gets. I once was in a Beechcraft King Air, a BE-90, and we were traveling from Corpus Christi, where it's always hot, through El Paso going to Los Angeles. We got to El Paso, and I want to say it was like 104 degrees, and El Paso is pretty high altitude as well. And so we had figured out our numbers, and we had the numbers for takeoff. And fortunately, at Biggs Army Airfield where we were, they had like, I don't know, 14,000 foot runways, because we were going to need a lot of runway to get our speed to take off that day because of the altitude and the heat. We got into what they used to call position and hold, line up and wait. And we got cleared for takeoff, and I pushed the power up on that King Air, and nothing. We sat there for 30 seconds, 40 seconds. The engines never spooled up. We sat there a full 60 seconds, nothing. I pulled the power back. I'm like, okay, there must be something wrong with my engines. We taxied out. I ran the numbers again, tried it again, pushed the power up. It was so high and it was so hot, I couldn't get the engines to spool up in a time frame that I was comfortable with. Now, if I had waited, 70, 80, 90 seconds and finally got those engines to spool up, I just wasn't comfortable with that. So we taxied back to the gate and we spent the night in El Paso. The next day it was a lot cooler. We blasted out of there and everything was good. All right, Matt Wright. I have a question regarding testing engines for bird strikes. Do they use actual birds and throw them into a running engine? I don't know the answer to that. My guess is probably not. All right, so let's differentiate. I don't think they throw live birds into an engine. I think there's no need for that. Now, would they throw a dead bird into an engine, or is it like the Bachelor special, the rotisserie chicken that you pick up on Thursday night with a bag of salad from the local grocery store? Could they throw a rotisserie chicken in? Probably that's more like what they do. Maybe they've got something that's an equivalent to it, but I'd love to hear from people that actually do that. So I'm sure there's somebody that listens to this, Captain Steeeve, that knows the answer to that question. I don't think they do live birds though, but I would think that they would do a dead chicken. I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that. Tom Hubin, good afternoon, Captain Steeeve. When a miner is flying alone, are there special precautions? There's no precautions from my standpoint as a pilot. I don't do anything differently with a miner on the airplane. However, the procedure for the flight attendants and the gate agents is very precise. The parent will drop off the miner with a gate agent. That gate agent is responsible for that child till they walk them all the way down the jet bridge with the documentation. The child also has a kind of a folder around their neck with more documentation on it. They get a positive handoff to the flight attendant. The flight attendant then shows them to their seat, and they can get up and they can go to the bathroom and get things to eat and so forth during the flight. At the end of the flight, everybody else deplanes before the unaccompanied miner, and then the flight attendant walks the unaccompanied miner to the gate agent, who takes that child and walks them to the parent, and there's a positive handoff, parent or guardian, positive handoff of that, but they keep track of them at all times. That's the procedure. All right. Thanks for the videos. Here's the final one. Juan Camachili. Sorry if I mangled your name. Captain Steeeve, you had mentioned prior to your flight, you calculate how much runway you need in case of an emergency. What numbers do you calculate, and do you divide? Well, Juan, I don't divide. I add, I subtract, I multiply on occasion, but strictly don't divide. However, most of that stuff is done for me at dispatch. I double check it. Back in the old days, you used to have a slide rule. All right, you could calculate with a slide rule or a whiz wheel. It was a thing to spin, and you could. There's lots of calculations you could get with a whiz wheel. Some of you older guys will remember the whiz wheel days where you carry them in your flight suit right down here. And it was a very accurate way of figuring out how much runway length you needed based on your weight and your winds and performance out of your engines that day. But now all that stuff is computerized. I can double check it. And generally speaking, there's an app for that. It's all right on the iPad, and it's all very, very accurate and extremely safe. Fantastic questions this time around. Keep those video questions coming. Remember, vertical, give me your name, keep them tight. These were really tight questions. I love answering them. Send them in, and you might make it on the next episode of Ask the Captain. All right, we had some great questions this time from back in the day when you used to have to wear headphones to fly around the country and listen to VOR frequencies, to, again, a question on what do you do with miners that fly in an airplane? Do you do anything different? If you want to see another episode of Ask the Captain where there are some fantastic questions, check out one of these two.